It's my honor to have you here and to have all this nice audience. This is actually the project Pro et Contra, which is made by Mrs. Bojana Skrt.
Hello.
It's an international project, obviously. We have young people from Slovenia, Lithuania, China, and Thailand.
Okay.
And they know your CV.
You do.
And they are the masters of debate. So I leave you to them. We have 1 hour, so I think that well, please come with all the questions of European integration. I had 15 minutes of introductory on the European Parliament and such, but I still think that they will come with some very interesting. There is one question which you will take later on, I think. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hi. I'm tired. Can I say this? Yesterday we finished the Strasbourg plenary. You know, once a month we meet in Strasbourg. We usually meet in Brussels. That's where our offices are. But we also, once a month, go to Strasbourg for 4 days, and we're all together and we vote on the legislative or non-legislative reports. And that is always a huge pressure cooker. Because a politician, at the end of the day, can speak a lot, but what really is the power in his hands or her hands is the vote. That's what members of parliament do. They vote. You know, we don't implement laws. That's what governments do. We don't, but we vote and we decide yes or no on things we have negotiated before for months, sometimes years. And that's a very exhausting procedure. And then I took a plane last night from Frankfurt, after taking a bus from Strasbourg to Frankfurt, to fly, get here at night. People told me, oh, you have to walk. It's so beautiful, there's a river and all that stuff. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. And then I went to my room and collapsed. And this morning I started meeting from very early on. But when I knew I was going to come to Slovenia, the first thing I asked our information office here, and I'm very grateful for their support in this, was an opportunity to do an event here, to talk to especially young people. And so thank you for organizing it and planning it. Now I don't know what you expect. I understand that look, the program says we're going to talk a little bit about fundamental rights and anti-terrorism in Europe, but of course it's much broader than that. You can ask me anything you want to, and I'll try to answer. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't. I do that, by the way. You know, there's a pressure on many politicians to pretend they know everything, because, well, to be fair to them, their voters demand it. So if I'm in Greece and someone asks me some crazy question, so how much money are we getting from the agricultural subsidies, in 2007? If I say, well, I don't know, then they go, well, Lambrinidisom, who is this guy? He doesn't know. So you're almost forced to say, 30 billion. You don't know. So, you're almost forced, but, I don't do that. And that may be explained by my American accent. Some of you may be getting this. I studied and I worked for many, many years in the States. And if you study in the States, one of the fundamental elements of education there is to always question, always ask. You have Nobel Prize winners, professors in a room that will tell you immediately, I don't know the answer to this, but I will look it up and I will tell you tomorrow. And that kind of, I think, of openness and honesty is quite important. I'll tell you something very, very briefly. I don't even want to talk a lot about this and then take your questions about terrorism and fundamental rights. After September 11th, we changed a lot the way we were looking at things, of course. Then we had 2 attacks in Europe, in London and Madrid, that brought it even closer to home. And I think that the debate of where you find the balance between trying to protect your citizens and protecting the one thing that we in Europe feel we have that distinguishes us from almost everyone else, which is the extremely advanced level of protection of fundamental rights, privacy, democracy. The balance between the two is always difficult. Many people will say, well, this is not really a matter of balance. You can never really have security unless you have fundamental rights. A society that is not free, that doesn't protect an individual, is really not a secure society. And that is a philosophical debate. We can have it. I agree with it. But let me try to give you at least an example that will maybe help you understand in a very simple way where the dilemma goes and how the pendulum moves here. Let's take, and what we actually have to vote on in the parliament, what decisions we have to make. Take cameras in the streets. A few years ago, or maybe 20 years ago, there were virtually no cameras in any street in any of our cities. Or maybe there were, in some repressive systems, but for all I know, but the technology wasn't even quite there. Okay? Then the technology got developed and it was possible to put a camera to observe people. So then you say, okay, now let's take, any particular country, let's take Slovenia, and say, well, what could be like a terrorist target? Well, you say, I don't know, the U.S. Embassy? Okay, maybe. Let's sit down, let's plan it. Let's say the U.S. Embassy. What else? I don't know, this major bank maybe, because, okay. So, you can have a list, and you find three or four places. That's the way it actually did start working. So then you say, okay, we have to put some surveillance cameras around there to make sure that, that they're protected. Okay. But then guess what? The terrorists knew the cameras were there. So then they started conspiring away from those cameras, a few streets away. Then the police comes and tells you, look, the terrorists saw these cameras and now they're conspiring a little bit further away. Would you mind if we put some cameras also, a little further away? And the answer is, well, okay. I'm kind of used to the cameras now because, I see them around the U.S. Embassy. So, yeah, okay. But not too much away. No, just a few blocks away. Okay. And then the terrorists see those cameras too. And they keep conspiring. You can see where this is going. And then eventually you have cameras everywhere, except now the police comes and tells me, you know what? The terrorists have decided they're going to be conspiring in living rooms. So, and you know what? We do have the technology now, because technology develops very fast. It's a very small camera, you won't even see it. Very small camera, we can put it in every living room, in every house. Is that okay? Well, I'm not sure what answer our societies would give, as we have been salami slicing our fundamental rights the past few years the way we have. Because it's not like a big cut of rights where suddenly you protest. It's little by little. Little by little. Well, and then you will come out and say, maybe some of you will come out and say, well, hold on, no. This is my living room, right? Come on. And then you will get the answer that many times we do get in these debates, which is, well, are you a terrorist? No. Well, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. What's the big problem? You're not a criminal. And my answer to this is, if you have nothing to hide, you don't have a life. Get a life. Everyone has something to hide, something legal to hide. If you have nothing to hide, tell me the names of your girlfriends and boyfriends the past 10 years. All of them. Not just the official ones. All of them. If you have nothing to hide, tell me every and each newspaper that you enjoy reading, so maybe I can understand what politically you would support and everything. If you have nothing to hide, give me your credit card numbers. The fact is, all of this stuff can be detected and determined today. If you collect all the information from cameras in the streets, from where you visit in the internet, from what you do. And the question is, have we really given a consent for that kind of society? In my view, Big Brother in Europe today, if it ever comes, will not come from any dictatorship or authoritarian regime imposing it, as could have been the case 30 or 40 years ago. If Big Brother comes to Europe today, ever, it will probably come with our consent. We will probably say yes to it. And therefore, I think it is extremely important to have this debate. It is very difficult to have, especially with young people, because you're a different generation from mine. I was not, and you're certainly a different generation from many of those people who actually, who tend to be older than me, even who, make the laws or are in the governments. You were raised with the internet. I was not, but of course, since the 90s, I'm very much in it. But you were born with this in your hands. Okay? And this is great fun. What does privacy mean? I want to be in Facebook. I want to have a picture in there. I want to be able to see what you look like. I want to do this. I don't understand what privacy means. Just leave me alone. Well, the fact of the matter is, it's the fundamental in a democracy issue that today we take for granted. But even my generation didn't when I had a dictatorship in Greece. And I see today, without dictatorship, how invasive, how aggressive, not just governments, but also private companies can be and are in trying to find everything about me in order to be able to sell me something. So it's not simply a matter of a government. And is it okay for me to be sold something? I mean, yes, of course. I like that. I like that. That ease. Sometimes I will allow for a cookie to be put in my computer from some company I want to be able to get information from because I like them. That's okay. But I want it to be my choice, and I want to be very well informed about the benefits and dangers of that choice. And I want to be a citizen that tells most people who want to look at who I am and what I do, no thank you. I will choose. The mere fact that technology exists today to allow those people who know how to use it to spy on everyone doesn't mean that I have given my consent for that. Technology itself, by merely existing, should not determine its uses. And many times, technology tends to determine its uses by merely existing. It's so tempting. It's there. We have this little tiny camera. Come on. Technology develops so fast we can have it now. What are we going to do? Throw it away? No, we can't. Okay, so where can we use it? Let's think. Well, maybe in bedrooms. Oh, okay. So this is where politicians come in. I have, as a member of the European Parliament, as a Vice President of the Parliament, I have daily to be faced with such tough choices. Do you like terrorists? No, I don't. Do you want them to kill innocent people? No, I don't. Okay then, give me all the power I need to fight them. Well, hold on a second. How much power do you want, Mr. Policeman, Mr. Government Official? As much as I can. I want the most information I can get about everyone in this room. Suspects of terrorism? No. I don't know if they're terrorists. I want everyone. Then I will put it in a computer and determine if they should be suspects. Oh, okay. Well, I don't think I want to do this, Mr. Policeman. Oh, then maybe you're supporting terrorists. If a bomb goes off, Mr. Lambrinidisom, maybe you will be responsible. You see how the debate goes sometimes? Well, the Parliament has managed in this debate to put its foot down. We are defending the citizens' lives vigorously. We have a lot of tough measures taken, security measures, allowed in governments to be able to protect security. Measures that in fact did not exist 10 years ago. But we determined that yes, in today's climate this is necessary. And it is proportionate. But there are other measures that we have said no to. And we will continue saying no to. I think the balance is difficult, but someone has to give the fight. And this is what at least people in the European Parliament are trying to do. We don't agree all the time, so we're split. We are conservative. I'm a socialist, a social democrat. Conservatives in the Parliament, something quite different. Liberals, something different. Although in some governments, liberals and conservatives are in coalition, or liberals and socialists in some European governments, I mean. Greens, another major party at European level. The left, so the left of the socialists and democrats, another major party. A couple of right-wing parties also present. I mean, very right-wing. For my taste, for anyone's taste, I think. But anyway, are also there. So, it's the European Parliament is a fascinating arena to be doing all this. You have to do politics with 27 countries, 22 languages, from people coming from all different backgrounds. So if you think that a Greek socialist and a Slovenian socialist is the same thing, think again. I mean, of course we both have basic understanding of the world, but we have very different histories, very different backgrounds. You know, a Maltese socialist and a Labour Party UK socialist, very different thing. But we all belong in the socialist group in the parliament. So we all try to develop common positions for these issues, in every issue, economy, everything else you can imagine. The same thing with the Conservatives, same thing with the Greens. Now, okay, so how easy is it to pass a position or not? To give you an understanding of how complicated it is, think of it this way. The parliament today has a conservative majority. But not a single party in the parliament has the majority of the parliament. So the Conservatives are 265 out of 736. So they don't have a majority. The Socialists were second, 186. Then the Liberals, fewer. The Greens, fewer. By definition, what this means is that it is impossible for any political group in the European Parliament to impose its will. Impossible. If you're ever going to have legislation on anything, you need to have more than one groups agreeing on the legislation. Okay? How easy is it for me, as a member of the European Parliament, or for a Slovakian member, to determine what that legislation should look like? Quite difficult. It's very different from a national. A national parliament is relatively simple. You're either an MP that belongs to the governing party, or you're an MP that belongs to opposition parties. Usually if you're in the governing party, you vote in favor of what the government says. Usually if you're in an opposition party, you vote against. Usually. There are some exceptions. In the European level, there's no government. There's the European Commission, but it's not a government per se. So when it sends out a proposed legislation, I cannot simply just take it and say, oh, they say it, so yes, or they say it, so no. I have to be able to read it and understand it in every detail. Because the Commission, not being a government, is comprised of a majority of Conservatives, but also some Socialist Commissioners, some Liberals. It's also a compromise in there. So I have to be able to understand where the devil lies in those details. I have to determine what I think is good in that legislation and what I think has to change. Then, first and foremost, I have to convince my political party, the Socialists, to follow my position. Because, as I said before, I may think that this paragraph is bad, but the British Labour Party person may think that this paragraph is perfect. So I have to be able to lobby, first of all, my own political group. If I manage to convince my political group to adopt my opinion, my position on the law, I'm not done, because now I have to find allies from other political groups, ideally groups closer to my ideology, but sometimes that is not possible. In some instances, we simply have to vote together, in quite a number of instances, Socialists and Conservatives, in order to be able to have a majority to have any law. So then I have to take my position, go fight with the Conservatives, who have their position, which is usually very different from mine. And I have to find a compromise that is closer to my view than to theirs. And that requires, and that's, if you like, another difference, another specificity of the European Parliament, that requires, if you're going to be effective there, to develop a credibility, a personal credibility even as a politician, that far exceeds your numerical value. So the Greek socialists, for example, were 8 in 186 socialists from all of Europe and 736 MEPs of all political parties. 8. That's small. Germans are 99 in total, let's say. Now, if you're going to have a chance to be effective, therefore, you have to try. to spend millions of hours reading through everything that exists, every potential legislation that may not be interesting to you, but it may be interesting to someone in Portugal or someone in Slovenia. A Slovenian colleague may come and tell me, this is a hugely important issue for me, which for me as a Greek may be entirely irrelevant. But if I don't understand the issue, if I'm not able to support that colleague in something that they care about, when an issue that I care about comes, I go ask for their support, they will say, bye-bye, not interested. Now, it's virtually impossible for a European Parliament politician to put out a press release and say, today I had 3-hour lunch with Tanya Fajon, one of your MEPs here in my political group, to discuss this issue, and then send it back to Greek newspapers. They will say, what is this? But if you don't do this, if every single MEP doesn't spend a lot of time trying to understand, to be present, to be active, on a number of issues that are not simply national in interest, then they will become irrelevant at the European context. Which is why it's so fascinating to be at the European Parliament and to be in Europe. Your mind, your political mind opens up. You have to be a really, really conservative, not politically, conservative psychologically, individual, to resist the richness of the arguments that come to you from all over the place, that helps you look at realities in ways that you might have thought impossible, that shake up some of your belief systems. But I think this is a complicated world. There are no easy answers to questions anymore, unfortunately. And I tend to respect politicians who can hold in their heads competing notions. Not in order for them to be confused forever, those I don't like, but in order, when they come to a decision, because I think politics is about decisions, that I can sense and feel that they came to something that is as wise as possible in a complicated world. Okay, well, thank you very much, and I'm open to your questions. And I hope this was enlightening a little bit. Did you understand me? Is everyone good in English?
Yes.
Even my English is really fast and all that? Really? Okay. Okay. Yes?
My name is Kipasat Nuprat from Chulalongkorn University, Thailand. As you mentioned, that politics is about decision. At the end of the day, as you say that you're representing Greece, and you're actually representing Europe. So at the end of the day, when it comes to the time that you have to make decision, so what are you going to base your decision on? Whether you're on your national interest or the interest of the entire Europe?
It's a fantastic question. There's some very, 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 very few European politicians who think only of the European interest as they understand it. The vast majority thinks, by definition, first their national interest. Okay? But here's the catch. If you care to protect your national interest as you understand it in Europe, you can never achieve it unless you're able to phrase it in a way that it becomes a European interest, that can convince people from other countries that that is important. For you to do that phrasing, you automatically have to stop thinking about your national interest alone. So you have to start thinking, what do people in Slovenia face in terms of the reality I'm facing? How can I convince them that my solution is good? How could my solution also help solve their issue? So you almost always begin, with some exceptions, like I said, from thinking nationally. But you almost always end up, if you're successful, acting on a European level. Okay? Now, there are also some issues that may not be that national, or per se national. And what we talked before, anti-terrorism. I mean, you can say Greece has an opinion, or Slovenia, or Portugal. Yes, sometimes they do, but that's more of a European issue by definition. At least you can begin shaping it more in Europe than initially at a member state level. So also issues such as these, in which the European Parliament, especially now with the Lisbon Treaty, where it has co-decision on many of those issues, can and does play a very important role. These I would say are European issues with national implications, of course, but they're mostly there. Was that okay? Did you? Okay. Yeah.
You said that
name and where you're from.
I'm Philip. I study here in Ljubljana at the University of Ljubljana at the Faculty of Arts. You said that if the Big Brother were to come, it will come by consent, and I have a ton of issues with that, but just two. One, if Big Brother is such a problem, why doesn't the European Union take any steps into supporting current initiatives in ensuring privacy which are open sourced, i.e. Vidalia, Tor, or even the HTML header that Firefox is now proposing? Secondly, what happened with ACTA? There was widespread opposition to that. I heard absolutely no real person on the ground saying this is a good idea. It comes to the European Parliament. It is firstly kind of rejected, but then in the end passed. If you say that consent has to happen, why isn't the European Union listening to the people? Why did ACTA happen in the way it did? Even though a ton of the stuff in the report were lies, numbers that didn't match up, people were arguing about it, petitions were signed, yet the European Parliament apparently just ignored all that. What happened?
Okay. Let me start from the second question first, because I happen to be a protagonist in ACTA. I was one of the 4 people who submitted a written declaration demanding transparency in the negotiations and demanding that things like this Sarkozy's Hadopi 3 strikes law are not in the agreement. And that was the written declaration that became the official position of the Parliament. It was signed, and very few do, by the majority of all parliamentarians. So thanks for the question. And I should have had it with me. Follow up that part as well. ACTA has not been approved by the European Parliament. You're wrong. It hasn't happened. It hasn't come. ACTA, a few months ago, was announced as being completed in negotiations that were secret up to that point. But even after they told us that the negotiations were finally completed, and every 2 or 3 months they would meet somewhere else for it, there usually was some other change and some other change. After we began our campaign against the ACTA as it existed up to that point, to the final text we've seen, but we don't know if it's really the final because it may change again, there have been a lot of substantive improvements. There were references to this 3 strikes law and to block and internet access for users. These are out. Some people say, well, yeah, but could they be now read as being in through the back door? Not really, but I assure you that I will be there among other MEPs to ensure that this is not the case when we see the final text. But the fact is that ACTA has not come to the European Parliament as a final text, and we have not approved it, okay? So when they bring it, we'll see it. Now,
can you explain what ACTA is? Because I'm not sure if everybody knows.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. ACTA is the international counterfeit trade agreement, and that is an attempt to have an international treaty among some major countries in the world, including the EU negotiating as one, the United States and others, but not China, interestingly, which raises the question as to how effective it will really be, to coordinate their enforcement policies when you have intellectual property right, copyright and other stuff violations, and when you have counterfeit goods violations, so something that's produced as Nike, although it's not Nike, or stuff like that. Now this raised a humongous amount of concern in Europe, at least among me and another number of my MEPs, because it was done secretly, texts were never released, and it was at the time when we felt, and it turns out correctly I should add, there was an attempt by some in the EU and by some others to do what I call legislation laundering, which is something like money laundering. So, you want, you're someone in Europe and you want the whole of Europe to adopt a particular position on, let's say, intellectual property rights, okay? But you know that if you try to pass it as European law, it will probably be rejected by the European Parliament, it will probably find opposition in the European Council. So then you say, okay, let's launder this law. Let's launder it through the international arena. So I can't get it through Europe, but if I get an international agreement on this, then Europe will be obligated to apply it as an international agreement. I will have avoided all the difficult negotiations with the European Parliament, with others, with national parliaments in Europe, and I will launder it through an international agreement. So that was what was happening. It had to do a lot with intellectual property, and intellectual property right protection of the internet. And I think that we have managed up to now, at least, with our written declaration and with the huge ruckus we created in the media in Europe for a while to bring a balance to this process. But we haven't seen a final agreement. The other issue of consent, then you talked about that, though, and you connected with open source, etc. Open source is something that the European Parliament supports in a number of resolutions. We don't legislate on it. It's not in the remit of our legislative powers. We applied in the European Parliament itself. So in our new websites that we're building, we've asked for open source to be the fundamental sort of thing and all that. Maybe I didn't understand all the question, but let's go to a couple of others and I'll come back to you. Unless there are no others.
No, they have a lot of questions asked, guys. I know that you prepared. Yeah. Just raise your hand.
Okay. Lithuania. I have a question. Is it possible to pass a law in the European Union which would affect only a few member states without affecting any others?
Well, yes. I guess it is. That has to do, but it never happens illegally. In other words, the treaties provide for it. So you do have some countries, the United Kingdom, Ireland, and others, who have demanded to be exempt from the application of a number of European laws as relates to, for example, borders, visas and all that stuff, or police cooperation, etc., etc. So the UK is not in Schengen, for example. Now, interestingly enough, the UK members of Parliament insist on voting on laws that apply to Schengen for the rest of us. So, although they have exempted themselves from the application of the laws, they have not exempted themselves from actually deciding on those laws for me. But that's the way that the European Union is being built. It's like it's a compromise. Then there are matters such as Schengen. Schengen is, you all know Schengen? Maybe, maybe not. Schengen is a common border management for those member states who are in it. So not everyone is in it. Sharing information among member states about suspect lists and all that stuff, in an attempt to make the borders more secure and efficient. Or the euro, the joint currency that we have. Not everyone is in the euro. 17 countries are, 10 aren't. So there are areas in which we have established that we can legally have a closer cooperation, and then we will pass laws or decisions that will apply only to those. So, but is that what you had in mind when you asked the question, or was it something else? Okay. I don't know if you had some particular legislation or something that has to do with Slovenia in particular. Okay. Who else? You're too shy. Okay.
I have a question.
Name?
Name. My name. Also, I'm from China. I'm a high school student. So as you have name. My name is Golan.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, don't be embarrassed. Look, my name is Stavrosom Lambrinidisom. That's like, at the beginning I said, oh, who's going to understand this name? But then I just found out a way to just, so don't. I say it out. I'm not. Go ahead. What's the question?
The question is this: as what you have mentioned, that the regulatory as well as some control over, like the cameras will threaten the people's freedom as well as their privacy. So, as an expert in the on the internet or the electronic media, what do you think of the control or the regulatory by the government over the internet and those in electronic media? And what's your stance on the WikiLeaks or something like that?
Well, that's not legislation. I think WikiLeaks is interesting. I think that even governments have the right to have some secrets, but I think that the revelation of those secrets is not necessarily a bad thing. So it's complicated. I wouldn't say that what WikiLeaks did was illegal. It got some information, it gave the information out. Maybe the person who initially gave the information committed an illegal act in their country, But I am fanatically in favor for as much information out as possible, but I don't think that there are no secrets. Sometimes you need them. Sometimes you're in very sensitive negotiations on very, very, very sensitive issues. Governments have a tendency to say, everything I do is secret. Okay? That's what governments want. They would love that. No one should know what we decide, what we talk. Okay? I would wish that citizens were on the other side. I would wish that citizens said, no, we want to know everything. And then you could find a balance. What I said before about consent and all that is, I'm afraid that citizens are moving. Citizens are getting used to being observed all the time. Citizens are getting used to not asking many questions. This happens when you have an economic crisis, when you have war. You get scared. You don't care to understand what's happening. You just want, you just leave me alone. At least me, my living room, my family, my kids. If something happens to my neighbor, that's okay, but please leave me alone. That to me is the disaster, is how democracies collapse. If people are scared into just feeling only that what matters is their own little 10 yards. Okay? So, that's what I would tell you about the WikiLeaks issue. It's just, I always feel, I was so used in my life to having clear answers. That's also easier when you're a Greek socialist, We tended to see the world as an easy place when it isn't. It's quite complicated, and it's very difficult for me. At the beginning, it was very difficult to be compromising all the time, to be realizing the complexities, to be talking about balances between this and that. But in fact, this is exactly what has to happen in most of these issues. There's no clear answer. In my view, you cannot say WikiLeaks is good or bad. Not simple. Now, governments regulating the internet. Absolutely not, in my view, except to ensure its openness. So if I were to have some regulation to ensure that the internet is open, that companies cannot cut you off or limit your access and all that stuff, just to ensure a level playing field with the user in mind, yes. And you know what? If you look at this issue, at this stage, at this time, if you do a Google search the past week or so, you will find that this is a huge debate in the United States right now. Which United States, after September 11th, moved the pendulum way away from fundamental rights and only towards security. But then one day they woke up, and now, because it's a very serious country, the United States, it's a very sophisticated, complicated country, now they have all the major intellectual and legislative debate on potentially protecting the internet and fundamental rights comes from the United States now. The Federal Communications Commission, and I mention this for any of you who are perverse enough to care about those details, but here they are, came out with a regulation that mandated the open nature of the internet. 2 days ago, a subcommittee of the U.S. House of Congress turned Republican dominated, rejected that. But that's not final, because now that has to go to the full committee, and then it has to go to the full House. But you see now there's a big debate there as well on this. And look, if I'm going to have measures like this in Europe one way or the other, what I'm saying is I want a debate here too, which is why I fought so hard about ACTA and about other issues. I don't want closed doors. I don't want people outside of Europe deciding and then bringing it into me. It's a big debate. Let's have it. Let's get the politicians who know, the users who know, the industry that knows best in a room, and let's discuss. Let's discuss, see if we cannot find a solution. I think I saw a hand there at some point, but no? Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, okay.
It's from Slovenia. You were talking today about how hard is made a decision in European Parliament. And I have a question: if it is possible to make really a decision which is good for everybody, because we have so many members of Parliament and so many parties that each of them wants to have something for them. If it is possible to have something which is good for everybody.
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question. Compromises are not. The fact that we need to have compromises does not mean that what we compromise on is always somewhere in the middle, a soup of, that's not the compromise. Sometimes you have to reach that. But compromises usually on major legislation have a very clear direction one way or the other. Usually, not always, the escape clauses you negotiate in those laws that would allow you to perhaps change their meaning just to satisfy your own electorate, usually they're very few, or not there, usually, not always. So in the end of the day, even if we vote together with the Conservatives on something, it is going to be a legal instrument that in its direction is pretty clear. And in its effect is pretty clear. Why would we vote with them if it's not exactly the direction we want? Well, because maybe in the process we have managed to add in there some elements that are crucial to us as well. Let me give you an example, very quickly. And 3 days ago, on Tuesday, we voted on a major report, not legislation, it was an initiative report in the European Parliament, about new economic instruments for growth in Europe today. One of the biggest fights that we gave with the Conservatives and the Liberals in the Parliament the past few months was about the imposition of what we call a financial transaction tax. That would be a tax, a very, very small one, that would be placed on all financial transactions when you buy stock, when a bank buys stock, whether in banks or in stock markets, that could bring up to 200 billion euros a year in Europe, which then would be money that could go to investments throughout Europe, job creation, dealing with the debt crises in some countries, at a time where everyone is cutting, because everyone in Europe is cutting now economically. So the question is, how can you get out of this recession, potential recession, if you only cut but you don't have money to invest? Okay? Many Conservatives believe that that is not necessary. Every socialist, many liberals, not all of them, every left-wing Greens thought it was necessary. So we had to negotiate this. A socialist was the rapporteur, the person doing the report. So the initial report was one that was fantastically good, I think. But then it would not pass through the plenary unless most other groups could accept it. the final report was voted by a lot of conservatives as well, although they disagreed with the financial transaction tax. Why? Because in the negotiations we agreed to put in that text other phrases that we probably wouldn't have chosen ourselves, but which did not ruin the philosophy of the financial transaction tax. If they did, we would have voted against. Issues such as, phrases such as saying that, all countries today in Europe have to cut in order to grow. Well, we socialists don't believe that cutting is alone the way to grow. The conservatives do. So we had to put that in the report. It didn't change its fundamental point, though. Now, for the conservatives, though, it was quite important. That kind of delicate, which is why many of them voted in the report, that kind of delicate balancing act always has to happen. But in the end of the day, this report came out, and this was the financial transaction tax report. There was no question about that. The compromises we have to make didn't water it down in a way that it lost any meaning. And the only way to understand this, the only way to understand how this works is to actually live it. I can explain it to you. But if you live through these endless, difficult negotiations, you can understand how this give and take can actually happen at European level. Much more difficult. When I'm in Greece, and they invite me on the television to talk about some issue, all my party members watch, right? Because they want to hear something. And the last thing they want to hear is for me to say to a conservative person across the table, what you're saying is interesting. That's the last thing. So if I'm in Greece and I go on television, what I'm supposed to say is, and you, the conservatives, who this and that and the other. And the conservative guy has to say to me, usually. Now sometimes I surprise them. I actually do say that what the conservative guy said was interesting. Of course, after that, I kill them softly. But sometimes I do say it. Okay, now look. Europe gives you the opportunity, the chance, because you're not in that national thing all the time, which is usually, the pressures for you to appear pleasant to your own voters are huge. Gives you the chance to be able to speak in a much more low-tone voice with people you disagree with. But that does not eliminate the disagreements. We have very deep ideological political divisions in Europe. We don't forget our ideological hats the moment we get on this plane to fly to Brussels. And the fact that we have to compromise in the end does not take away from the fact that to reach that compromise we usually have extremely tough, extremely difficult political and ideological fights to reach that point. But that point we must reach, because like I said before, no one alone has the majority to pass any law. So either you find a compromise or you don't have laws. You have to find them. Okay, are we done or not? We have more time?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm Ida, I'm from Lithuania, and many politicians in Lithuania are from show business. And the question is, do you think that politicians should be just the people who are well educated, and I'm talking about people who studied political science and stuff, and why? Why do you think that?
No, of course not. Come on, what kind of question? You know my answer. Of course I don't think that. I do think that to be a European politician, however, at the European Parliament, it does help. Because of the reasons I described before, the reasons of being effective in that arena, it does help to speak at least a language. English, French, German, it helps. It's not necessary. We have translations in all 27 languages and everything, but you don't have a translator all the time next to you. You have them in the official meeting rooms. A lot of the work happens outside of them. The negotiations, all that stuff. So, I do think that there's some elements that every different political post may require, but absolutely not. The whole point of this democracy is that you cannot be an elitist. Elitism, in any which way you see it, has always been sort of the philosophy of authoritarian regimes. You know, even the elitism of the simple man, that's also an elitism. I mean, eliminating an educated person because, you know, maybe they don't feel what the people feel is terrible elitism. I think that everyone should have the right to be involved in politics and try to convince with the, you know, weapons and the minds that they have, the people to support them. At the end of the day, the people are the ones who decide, period. And sometimes I don't like the decisions that people make. When my party loses in Greece, I'm not at all happy. I think that people made a terrible decision. But you know what? That's democracy. You know, and I have to live with it, and I have to become better. I have to become better. I don't have to trick them. I don't have to repress them. I simply have to sit down and become better. Become more effective in my politics, more convincing in my rhetoric, but that's I love that. I love to be in that daily challenge. Now, of course we all have our own, I'm very educated, you could say. I mean, I've studied a lot, different. I've studied, maybe not that educated, but at least I've gone to many universities, I've got a lot of nice degrees. But, education is certainly that. I'm not in favor of people who say, oh, street education, that's really, street smarts is everything. There are people who say this. I don't care where you studied, forget that. Did you actually live in the streets? Do you, like me? Well, yeah. Okay, but that's also an important element. I mean, understanding how the world works. Many times they say about academics, the classic thing, that live in their ivory towers, they don't really understand the real world, and for some of them that is true. Ideally, you must try to combine savvy of actual real life with a level of understanding of an education that can help you propose intelligent solutions to things. But in a democracy, to reach that kind of compromise, you need all kinds of politicians. Both people who don't care at all about what you're talking about, compromise. People who feel very strongly about what they feel, they come and they make your life miserable, shouting in your face every day, protesting, making you lose your sleep. That's what democracy is all about. That's how it actually forces me, to the extent that it does, to be as good a politician as I can be. All right. Last question. Someone has to moderate this. Oh, by the way.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak. So we have time for one more question.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
My name is He Lantian from China. So my question is very simple. Would you consider free access to internet a fundamental human right? Why or why not?
Okay. My answer is yes, I would. And the reason for that is that we exercise a number of our other fundamental human rights today, largely through the internet. So we always thought and said that education is a fundamental right. But education today is exercised increasingly electronically. I mean, the internet is a source that we can go and find things and learn things. It's like a worldwide school in some ways. Political freedom, political speech, the right of the freedom of speech. We used to write letters, or we used to go to, we used to do a number of things that today we do only through the internet. We communicate with people, we express our political views. We do all that through the internet. Freedom of speech is a fundamental right. Therefore, the medium through which we exercise it obviously should be equally protected in my mind. There is a debate in this in Europe. Some people say, well, yes, but maybe access to internet itself is not a fundamental right, whereas the others are. Not in my view. Look at it this way. Would you I don't know, would you, if a child is, bad in school, does something, naughty in school, something they shouldn't do, would you ever punish it by telling it you cannot go to school again, or for a long time or something? You wouldn't. I mean, you wouldn't cut off school access. Someone, a kid kills another kid, maybe, you expel it, but, I mean, in the same way, the internet, of course, is open to potential abuses. People can abuse the internet and do abuse it. from terrorists to organized criminals to whoever else. I don't believe that any crime committed via the internet should not be punishable. I think it should be. But under the exact same procedures and conditions we have for tackling crime in the non-internet world. So, we don't allow the police to open any door of any house they want. We don't allow the police to open any letter you send to the post office, even if you're not suspect for something, to see if you're writing something wrong. So we shouldn't allow this on the internet. But on the internet we should also allow for crime to be fought. Okay? So what we have in our real life, we should have in our internet life. Saying that something is a fundamental right, by the way, does not mean that it can never be restricted. It means that it can be restricted only under very strict conditions. So speech is a fundamental right. But if I am in a crowded movie theater, I don't have the right to shout fire if there's no fire. Because if I shout fire when there's no fire, I create a panic, people stand up, they step on each other, they kill each other. So, walking anywhere I want to is a fundamental right, but I don't have the right to cross the street when it's red. Because if I do, and everyone else does, chances are we all crash together and go to heaven. So, saying that something is a fundamental right does not mean that you cannot at sometimes restrict it. But it can happen in very rare occasions and only under a very strict test. In Europe, the test is that to restrict a fundamental right, for whatever reason, what you're doing must be necessary. So in other words, I need to catch a terrorist, and to do this I need a camera. Because I cannot simply do it by having policemen on the street, for example. I need to prove it's necessary. I need to prove it's proportionate for what I'm trying to do. So some people might say, well, okay, terrorism is a terrible crime. So I will accept losing some of my rights to privacy by having a camera in the street that may also see me walking, although I'm not a terrorist. But I will accept it because terrorism is a great crime. But I will not accept to have surveillance everywhere if I'm going to simply catch someone who steals a bag from an old lady in the street. Because stealing a bag is a very bad thing, but would not justify in itself violating my fundamental right to privacy. So something needs to be necessary, it needs to be proportionate to the crime or the bad you're trying to fight, and it has to be appropriate in a democratic society. Appropriate, so even if it's necessary, even if it's proportionate, it could be judged inappropriate in a democracy. In other words, even if someone, give an example, to end the way we began, even if the police could prove to me that they need a small camera in every bedroom, because it's necessary, because now terrorists actually do conspire in bedrooms. Even if they were to prove to me that this is proportionate, in other words, terrorism is such a huge crime that the violation of my privacy is proportionate to the crime I'm trying to fight. Would it be appropriate in a democratic society to have a camera in every bedroom? So the answer to that, I'm hoping, would be no. Now, so you see, and this is not or, it's not either necessary or proportionate or appropriate, it's and. It needs to be all those three things to justify restricting a fundamental right, but you can do it. You can restrict it. So you can restrict access to the internet under this test. You can restrict freedom of speech under this test. You can restrict freedom of assembly under this test. But it needs to be a fundamental right, respected by all, with very, 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 very narrow restrictions under this test. Okay, thank you very much to everyone. I appreciate it. What is this?
Okay,
It's a camera.
On behalf of the all participants here, I'm Beseda from Chulalongkorn University, Thailand. I would like to present this
This is wonderful.
token of
Thank you so much to
appreciation
all of
to express our deepest gratitude for
Thanks a
your
lot.
very informative and fruitful discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is very, don't be jealous, but this is very nice actually. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. We continue at 12:30. We may go upstairs. For a
Okay.
moment. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. You'll
Okay,
see.
bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye, Joanne. Bye-bye. Thanks for coming. Bye. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Well, yeah, you never have time. Bye. Bye.